Good evening, Freedom Church. I'm sorry that I'm not able to be with you live, but it's really great to be part of the service. Even so, my name is Reverend West McNeill. I am the director of the New York State Labor Religion Coalition, which is a program of the Cairo Center, and live in Schenectady, New York. And tonight I'm going to reflect a little bit on this text that we heard earlier and also share a little bit about a campaign that we've been engaging with around the New York State budget. But to start with the text today from the Gospel of Luke, this I think can be a challenging text. Jesus' commandment to love our enemies, and maybe especially the example that's in this passage of turning the other cheek, is one that has been used over time in ways that have been hurtful and disempowering to people experiencing violence and injustice. And I think this text might feel especially challenging then right now because we're living in a time when our enemies feel really close at hand. It feels like practically hour by hour, we're reading about new attacks coming through executive orders or mass layoffs or deportations, or the threats of really devastating cuts to programs like Medicaid. As a trans person, I'm definitely feeling shaken by the escalation in the federal government's efforts to dehumanize and erase us. And so, in this context, if turn the other cheek means standing down in the face of actions like these, then it is really hard to see how this gospel message could be good news. And so it's really important for us to be clear that when Jesus says, love your enemies, he's not telling his followers to just passively accept the violence and injustice that's directed at them. He's not encouraging his followers to just go along to get along or anything like that. In fact, in the verses immediately prior to today's reading, Jesus tells those gathered that following in the way of God's kingdom will put them in conflict with others, and that conflict will actually be a sign that they're on the right track. So these are the verses right before the ones we read today. Blessed are you when people hate you and when they exclude you, revile you, and defame you on account of the Son of Man. Rejoice on that day and leap for joy, for surely your reward is great in heaven. For that is how their ancestors treated the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full now, for you will be hungry. Woe to you who are laughing now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets. So I think it's clear that Jesus is not instructing anyone to equivocate about the violence or injustice directed at them and their communities. He's not saying we shouldn't have enemies, but he is telling us to love our enemies. So, what does that look like? There's a hadith on this topic that I find really helpful that speaks to this. It reads, Allah's apostle said, help your brother, whether he is an oppressor or he is an oppressed one. People asked, O Allah's apostle, it is all right to help him if he is oppressed, but how should we help him if he is an oppressor? The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, by preventing him from oppressing others. The scale of injustice, poverty, and inequality that we are facing is a crisis for all of society, not just those who are the most targeted and victimized. To love the oppressed and the oppressor, we are called to intervene to stop oppression and to create justice. And this doesn't happen through thoughts and prayers or through dialogue or something like this. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., it happens through organizing a revolution against the injustice, not against the lives of the persons who are our fellow citizens, but against the structures through which society is refusing to take means to lift the load of poverty. This coming Tuesday, Labor Religion Coalition and the Cairo Center, along with the New York State Poor People's Campaign, will be joining a coalition of groups in Albany for a day of action calling on our governor and legislature to raise taxes on the wealthiest individuals and corporations in New York in order to invest in the needs of our communities. Here in New York, we have the worst income inequality in the country. We have really extraordinary levels of wealth, including 139 billionaires living in our state. But we also have more than 8 million people who are poor or low income. And we're especially facing a crisis of child poverty. New York's child poverty rate is higher than 40 other states when you look at the official federal poverty measure. Syracuse actually has the highest child poverty rate of any large city in the whole country. It's at 46%. Rochester and Buffalo are number 5 and number 8 on that list, meaning that of the 10 cities with the highest child poverty rates in the United States, 3 of them are in upstate New York. A few years ago, New York passed a law that made a commitment to cut the rate of child poverty in half by 2031. And so far, we are not on track to meet this goal. Child poverty has actually gone up. But just a couple months ago, the official commission that was tasked with helping New York meet this goal issued their policy recommendations. And while they are far from perfect, they're pretty strong and they're projected to get New York to that 50% child poverty reduction goal if they were fully implemented. Over the past few months, we've been campaigning to get the governor and the legislature to include those full recommendations in this year's New York State budget and to pay for them by increasing taxes on the wealthiest corporations and individuals. Now, ending child poverty is a goal that almost everyone can get behind. But the rubber really hits the road when we start talking about how to pay for the policies that we know work. The recommendations that just came out that I mentioned are estimated to cost about $9 billion. And that might sound like a lot, but the bills that we're going to be advocating for on Tuesday, which would modestly raise taxes on the richest households and corporations, would bring in more than 5 times that amount. So we absolutely have the resources in New York State to cut child poverty in half. In fact, to end child poverty and to do so much more to meet people's needs. But to do that, it does require directly taking on those in our state who are hoarding wealth and power. So, how do we love the billionaires of New York State? How do we love a governor and legislators who too often take their side at the expense of the rest of us? I think this passage today and the ministry and teachings of Jesus overall teach us that to love all of our neighbors, including those who are our enemies, we have to interrupt this disordered relationship of extreme wealth alongside poverty. We have to take action against structures, not against our fellow human beings, but against a political and economic system that is set up to perpetuate poverty in the midst of plenty. And in doing that, we show that we're not writing off or giving up on any of God's children. It is not inevitable that things are the way they are. And therefore, we don't believe that the oppressor is condemned to oppress forever. We believe that we can build a world where it is on earth as it is in heaven. We believe that we can lift from the bottom in a way where everybody rises. And it's in that faith and hope that we commit to love everyone, and including our enemies.